thoughts on the COVID-19. First, a few interesting things that I came across for the viewer to put together how they see. I'll show you my interpretation of it and go from there. Real quick, I want you to research and Google these things. Number one, Dr. Helen Chu out of Seattle. Number two, Event 201. Number three, ID 2020. Number four, China's social credit system. Okay. And then I'm going to go through each of these, and I'm just going to highlight different points. I've gone over these, and it's just a few things that were brought to my attention, and see what you think. Okay, so Dr. Helen Chu was the infectious disease doctor out of Seattle, who was the first to identify COVID in Seattle. From the article I read, it was out of Renton. And subsequently, they shut down the school. The individual was in, cleaned everything. Great, right? The disturbing thing about this is that she was told to stand down. She was told to stand down and not test for COVID-19 in the beginning. Out of moral obligation, she felt that she had to. She went forth, found it, then was told to stand down again by the CDC and all of her superiors. Now, also, another thing to research, Crimson Contagion. There was an exercise apparently done last January, 2019, by the Trump administration and his Department of Health and Human Services. How informed he was on it, I'm not sure, because in my estimation, I think presidents are shielded from most stuff. But he may have. There's no way of knowing, right? But in this, it was basically an exercise going through and seeing what the government's reaction to a national epidemic would be, and what a pandemic would be. So, it wasn't good, to say the least. Now, typically after events like this, you would have, I'm going to go very basic layman military terms, AAR, after action review, which is basically identifying where the shortcomings were so that we can change things and implement policies and procedures to fill in the gaps where we failed, so that the next time this happens, or if it happens, we run things much smoother and we are not coming into the same issues and problems that we have. The problem that is very apparent with this is that the U.S. government, knowing that there was an issue happening globally, that you have a massive amount of Chinese population just north of Seattle in Vancouver, BC, and in fact, Vancouver, BC airport being the hub from China to the west is what it is known for. Massive amounts of potential people coming from Wuhan and other areas crossing into our borders and subsequent infections. Now, moving out of those two, there was a Event 201 exercise also done about a global pandemic. The video on this, it was posted November 2019. I'm not sure exactly when it was held, but basically it was all of them coming together and discuss and kind of wargaming the scenarios and seeing what they would need to do in order to be more effective. One of the things that they would need to do to be more effective was have a centralized global command and control, which makes absolute sense. If you're going to combat anything in any way, you need to have centralized command and control. You have to have everybody on the same page, period. The issue comes in when the people in charge of that page may not be doing the best possible case, or may not be doing the best job, and potentially potentially causing more problems than creating solutions. And it would seem that in the case of Helen Chu, that if that article is accurate, that it's correct, that they were actually not only not ahead of the curve, not at the curve, but behind the curve. And in my experience, usually government is more reactionary, not proactionary, and so it makes sense. But the big issue with the global, or with the Event 201, one thing that they were trying to decide was, or what they decided was, that this also meant that that governing agency would have control over resources. And what that means is this: rather than having each nation have its own resources, have their own policies, and having the WHO set down said policies and say, hey, this is the way to protect against this, da da da. It was more of, and they use these words very, very specifically, hoarding supplies. You don't want this nation hoarding supplies, putting this nation at risk, and so therefore they should have the authority to come in and take the resources from said nation and redistribute to the others, which opens up a whole Pandora's box of global governance under the guise of the World Health Organization, and of course backed by the World Bank. And also then you kind of get into the slippery slope of, well, then what else, what other crisis can then be warranted for the redistribution of resources? And this sounds good on at the face of it, because we, from a Western world, we go to the other nations and we see the poverty, the lack of just the overall lack of facilities as far as, like, trash pickup and hygiene and hospitals and food and proper dwellings. I mean, some of these nations are in bad health. However, a lot of these nations are in bad health because of the predatory financial practices of said banks and the corporations that were under them, going in and building infrastructures on the promise of, you pay us back X amount of money once you get up and running, knowing they would default. Once they default, then they come in, take the resources, and the money that should be going into the people then goes to the corporations and out to the 401s and out to all this stuff. And so it's a vicious cycle, unfortunately, of coming in, getting people dependent upon that system, but then yanking the rug out from underneath them, creating massive poverty, massive reliance on a failing system, and draining that area of resources to be distributed where the global governance sees fit. Okay, so it's not as simple as we're doing what's best for the people. There are there's ulterior motives behind this. Okay, that in my observation and experience, we have to be fully aware of before we just go, oh, okay, it sounds like a great idea, let's do this. Now, and one of the things that they were said 50 minutes in was they had to, quote, combat, the word was combat, the, quote, rhetoric from politicians and conspiracy theorists that would be against said governance, okay, using the business, the healthcare, and the scientific communities. Okay, so their connections in those, in other words, creating narratives within what's business. Well, business is everything. Media, all your different industries, from oil to electronic, like everything, right? Everything's a business model, basically, in our world. The health and scientific community basically doing what they must do in order to convince the people that is in their best interest. The issue that I see with that is that when business is the one, and these people are the ones doing this, I'm going to be generous here. It is seldom the case that people come before the economic bottom line. And when a said governance bases its health on its economic prosperity, and that economic prosperity is based on perpetual growth and profits, in order for one to profit, another must be taken from for that individual to profit, then it is giving the keys to the hen house to the foxes. Actually, it's beyond that. It's beyond that. So, I'm not saying that is their intention. In my observation, a lot of these things, it's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? It starts out good. The problem is that it then gets twisted along the way, and those who can use such policies to benefit the very few at the expense of the majority usually tend to do so. Not saying for sure that's what will happen. Who's to say? It's a potential. I think it is up to individuals to be informed enough and not feared into going along with something just because it sounds good in the moment and gives them a false sense of security or the illusion of safety in the moment. That they are in turn condemning their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to a lifetime of absolute control over their day-to-day lives. And let me get into that. And this goes into ID 2020. ID 2020 was a program that is being developed to be implemented this year by pure coincidence to put together vaccinations and biometrics. So by 2030, they want to have everyone biometrically marked for identification purposes, and have with that vaccinations linked in with it. Also, eventually in conjunction with banking systems, healthcare records, criminal records, and of course that would eventually be your social records, which is basically a psychological profile on you to begin with. That's what social media is. It is a way for them to psychologically profile every single one on the planet, and then use that in such a way as to steer you where they want you, but it's a completely different thing. Something to think about. So if you look at the ID 2020 program, it has very good, very logical, very rational, and altruistic intentions within it. To have every single person on the planet, you know, as it says, being able to prove who they are. In some places, you know, there's no birth certificates. It's very poor, right? So in one case, it's very good to prove who you are. It's very good to be able to have all that stuff at your fingertips. However, it's also at other people's fingertips. Just like you scan an iPhone, right? Well, this is pretty much that's what they eventually want to do. So it's a way to fingerprint the world, okay? And the issue with this that I could see it being possibly abused is, say, in China. Now, in China, if you look into the social credit score and the documentaries they've done on this, one of the things I saw and was that how it is being used to police the people completely. And in fact, it was said, quote, they don't want them to, quote, take a step without their permission. Okay, it is a virtual prison that they want to create. In other words, if your social credit scores drops to such a point, you will not be allowed to travel. You will not be able to, well, let me back up. So, basically what they have is, let's say I want to play an instrument on the street. I go to the local municipality, I get a permit. They give me one of those little square thingamajigs that you zap with your phone, and I go put that in my violin case. As I'm playing, somebody comes by, gets their phone and goes boop, and it transfers the money instantly. So you don't have to worry about germs. You don't have to worry about contamination, because everybody is no longer using money or credit cards, and this is being test run in certain areas all throughout China, and it's totally done. And so everything's on the phone. The issue is they also have this linked in with facial recognition. And they showed that you're walking down the street, you go off you cross the street at the wrong point, a camera picks up your movement, right? Skynet's like, we're going to identify this person, do a facial recognition, kick it back to the system. The system then kicks it back to your biomarker, kicks it back to your phone, and as you're walking across the street, you get a text message. Hey, you have just been awarded a ticket for jaywalking. X amount of money has been deducted out of your bank account. Your social credit score is now dropped, blah, blah, blah. Okay? And everything is done electronically because you're hooked in through everything electronically. On one hand, you can say, dude, imagine like no more people running around graffiti or damage or this or that. You would be able to find like how the security that would offer. On the other hand, you also then have the potential for, as what China has done, anybody that is against the Communist Party, they have virtually locked down to where the only thing they can do is go to work and come home. They're on lifetime quarantine. Because under this program, if your credit score drops enough and they tag you, you are not permitted. You get flagged. You go to try to buy a bus ticket, denied. You try to buy a plane ticket, denied. Passport, denied. This thing even tracks your credit score. You know how we go to the store and we type in our what we're buying? It tracks everything. Some of the things they listed on there was if you buy too many video games, if you buy alcohol, tobacco products, whatever it may be, that they deem not socially acceptable or at amounts not socially acceptable, then your credit score drops. Okay? So the potential for this then is an absolutely beyond Orwellian nightmare. I mean, lockdown, Borg style, Skynet is on, drones out. I mean, like, it's beyond our imagination at this point, scientific wise, where this could eventually go. Now, am I saying reason to panic? No. What I'm saying is that if we look at the potential of where it can go, and we can look at where the good application can be, then it's up to us as the people to put up a united front and demand what limitations can be placed on these things before we accept them. And if they try to sneak something in, we go, no, that dog ain't gonna hunt. Out of here. That's all you gotta do. It's not like you have to freak out. You just have to realize that these things are very synchronistically occurring at this time and grand coincidences that are leading towards the potentiality of a virtual prison for every single man, woman, child on the planet eventually. Whether or not that occurs is completely in our hands. There's no reason to panic, get angry, get mad, get this. There's no reason. The irony of this is when I was a RAF guide working, I took some of these computer guys out from Seattle. They're actually uber heart-centered. They've actually been the ones at times standing up against how some of their stuff was how it was being implemented. Okay, so the people producing this stuff, like, they're good guys everywhere. All of us are, like, so many of us were like, yeah, dude, like, nah, we don't want that. So there's no reason to panic. It's just needing to come across the table and come up with solutions that that work for everyone. That's all. And this is just some information. I've kind of noticed some synchronicities and some coincidences occurring that that I think might be of interest to some people. Check it out, research it, see what you think, and yeah, no fear, right? One last thing. I'm just going to throw this in there. If they're truly concerned about locking down people, would you not think that it would be wise to test first responders at least once or twice a week, knowing that they are the ones going into the homes of everyone who is on lockdown? In other words, the mobile transmitter of a potential contagion. Would that not be a good idea nationally? Would that not be one of the first things you would want to do, is protect your first responders and your healthcare workers? And well, actually, it's not protecting, it's monitoring so that if things go bad, you're not inadvertently contaminating others. Just a thought, throwing that out there.